we had reached a stage in parenting where my daughter's evening activities started to be over like the traditional dinner hour.
Yeah.
And so there was an evening every week where my husband would take her and they'd get burritos on the way or something. And she would have an activity. And suddenly I had a night to myself. Sometimes I just had a night to feed myself and take some time off. And so I started eating things that one or the other of them wouldn't necessarily want to eat with me. And so that was the idea that launched this book. And then, of course, when Girl Dinner started, I thought, oh, just do a little more. Just like yourself. I want us to treat ourselves as well as we treat other people.
Welcome to Mind, Body, Spirit, Food. I'm Nikki Sizemore, and in this podcast, we explore how food connects us and sometimes disconnects us to our minds, bodies, spirits, the earth, and our communities. This is a space dedicated to bringing more presence, intention, ease, and joy into the process of feeding ourselves. Let's dive in. Hello, my dears, and welcome back to the show. If you've been struggling with weeknight family dinners or cooking for yourself or even school lunches, this episode is for you. I speak with cookbook author and journalist Georgia Freedman, whose work has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Martha Stewart Living, Food and Wine, Afar, and more. Funny enough, we discovered that Georgia was also the managing editor at Saveur magazine. And funnily enough, we realized that we were there at the very same time, me in the test kitchen as an intern during culinary school, and she as an editor. Georgia is also the author of the book Snacking Dinners, which we get into today. In fact, Georgia and I cover so much ground in this conversation. Everything from the real practical side of getting dinner on the table to how we can nourish ourselves more deeply when we bring intention into the kitchen. She shares her tricks for cooking just for yourself. And spoiler alert, you don't even need pots, pans, or a stove to make a dinner feel special. We also talk about weeknight cooking, how to get dinner on the table in under 20 minutes, and Georgia shares the pantry staples she always has on hand to make that happen. We swap stories about feeding kids, the challenges, the victories, and the tricks that we've used that have actually worked. And we dive into the world of school lunches, offering tips, tricks, and inspiration. Be sure to check out this week's newsletter because Georgia has shared the recipe for her tuna hand rolls, which we talk about in this episode. And speaking of the newsletter, if you haven't yet subscribed, now is the time. I share weekly new recipes, all of which just happen to be gluten-free, but you'd never know it. I also dive into some of these topics deeper. And if you become a paid subscriber for just a few dollars a month, you honestly make all of this happen. This is an ad-free space. It could not happen without community support. So if you've been enjoying this podcast or enjoying the newsletter, consider becoming a paid subscriber. In doing so, you'll gain access to the full recipe archive of over 125 recipes. You get the ability to request recipes, you get bonus content, and more fun perks. And last but not least, my Mind, Body, Spirit, Food cookbook is now available for pre-order. This book is so near and dear to my heart and really came about because of all of you. In the book, I share recipes that have never been featured anywhere else. These are all like my little babies. I can't wait to share them with you. Also offer mindfulness tips and more to help you bring more joy into the process of feeding yourself. I'll be sure to include a pre-order link in the show notes. All right, my friends, without further ado, let's get into the show. Well, Georgia, welcome to the show. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
I am excited too. Now, before we dive into today's topics, I should say, because I have so many interesting things to ask you. I'm going to start by asking you the first question I ask all my guests so we can get to know you a little bit more. And that is, what is your cultural upbringing and how has that influenced your relationship to food?
Yeah. So I grew up in Southern California, and I think that's really the most relevant piece. My dad's Jewish, my mom's not. They were sort of hippies when I was growing up, so there was a lot of like brown rice and tofu. But really growing up in Southern California, I think really shaped how all of us ate, not just because that sort of hippie food was very popular in the 80s down there, but also just because of the access to fresh vegetables and fresh seafood and local meat and all the rest of it long before the rest of the country was talking about it. Santa Barbara had one of the very first farmers markets. And so my grandmother, my mom's mom, was a really good cook. So my mom grew up with that example and is an excellent cook. My dad cooks well also. But yeah, I think that really influenced everything. And then, of course, being in Southern California, we had sushi as a treat sometimes, which wasn't a thing in a lot of places, but in LA, you get a lot of that. Not a lot. Santa Barbara doesn't have a ton of well, it does now, but at the time, there wasn't a ton of other food other than Mexican and some other Central American foods. But
yeah, I just contrast that with my childhood, and I think we're probably around the same age, but it's like growing up in the Midwest where we had access to iceberg lettuce for a long time, and then romaine was a big deal. And I didn't eat sushi or try curry or any of that until I was in college. That's even though I was a total foodie as a kid, I didn't even see my first eggplant until I was in high school. And it was just access, right? And for me, that pushed me into the food world, but in a different way. Whereas you kind of had all of these flavors growing up, which is so lucky.
Yeah. Yeah.
What was your journey like into becoming a food writer then? Was food always the thing for you, or did you kind of find your way there?
Yeah. I mean, food was always such an integral part of my life that I don't think it occurred to me that it was something that you would do as a career. My degree is in international politics, and I really thought that I was like going off to the State Department or something. And then my first job out of college was down in Lower Manhattan working for the New York State Assembly. And the district I was working with was very heavily, it was Lower Manhattan. So it was a lot of 9/11 related work. And even with that, like really heavy, meaningful work, I realized very quickly that government work was not going to be for me. And I liked the constituent services stuff. I liked helping the people one-on-one, but the rest of it wasn't going to be a good fit. And so I ended up working in restaurants in front of house and writing. And because I was working in restaurants, I started writing about food. I had a very early food blog. And I realized eventually that could be something that I could marry these other two passions of mine.
Did you ever work at Saveur?
I did, yes.
Because I think we were there at the same time. I'm just thinking this because I was there as an intern in culinary school when Liz Pearson was in the kitchen and James Osland was editor-in-chief. Were you there?
That was so if Liz was still there, that was one of my first years at Saveur.
Oh my gosh, so funny. Yeah. Yes. Samantha Sandavratne and I were the two interns, and we had like the best time with Liz in that test kitchen. It was the best internship ever.
That was a really, so my first job in food publishing was as an intern when Coleman Andrews was still there. And then as he was transitioning out and Jim was coming in, I came on as assistant editor and then eventually left as managing editor 5 years later because
so funny.
You get to do a lot of things, right?
Amazing. Well, before we kind of jump into this idea of weeknight dinners and cooking, in your bio, something I read caught my eye, and that was you discovered that food can serve as a very useful lens for looking at culture. And this is kind of one of the themes of this podcast, really, how food and culture are intertwined. I just would love to hear maybe some things you've learned about yourself or about that idea of food as a lens into culture throughout your career thus far. Is there anything that sticks out?
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons that I ended up at Saveur and was there for so long. And it really also shaped how I approached food. Because I think we used to be called like the National Geographic of food magazines.
Yes.
With my background and interest in culture, basically, which is why I think I did the degree I did. It's a very good way to get to know people. Like when I started writing about food and showing up in people's kitchens, I learned so much more about their backgrounds and their histories and the way the society around them functioned than I would have if I had gone in and just asked a bunch of like sociological questions.
Yeah.
You know, if you're in someone's kitchen cooking with 3 generations of cooks, I've spent a lot of time living in and studying in China. And so I've done a lot of work there. And once I'm in someone's kitchen, you learn that the grandmother's recipes are this way because she fled during World War II. And then this generation didn't really learn to cook because of all the upheaval that was going on. And then the migration patterns that happened that led to the granddaughter's way of cooking. And that stuff is just fascinating. But then more recently, I've been really diving into this California question because I moved back here after being away for 20 years almost, maybe 18. And this question of like, there is no one California food because we all just eat what our neighbors eat. And, you know, the influxes of immigration to California have never stopped. No one group ever like put their mark on California after the Spanish. And so everyone I talk to talks about the produce, of course, but then also that like when they were growing up, they assumed that this dish that their mom made was Vietnamese because they were Vietnamese, but it's actually a Korean dish that she had learned from a neighbor or, you know, all these stories. And that's how I feel about my cooking, but it really helps tell people stories.
Yeah.
To ask, you know, what do you eat? And then you get all these little things.
Yeah. And I totally agree. And it's interesting because the action too, like you said, if you sit down at a table with somebody and you start asking questions, I think about this even with my kids. If I try to do that, it's like you might get like some very stilted questions. And here you and I are doing this together right now. But I think that the process of being engaged in our bodies, of being kind of focused, but kind of not focused on the conversation almost allows us to go deeper. And I say this about my kids because I try to have the most meaningful or deep conversation with my kids when we're doing things like cooking or even driving a car where they don't feel it's like mom's full attention is on her, but they might feel a little bit safer because they're in their body and they're doing a different task. And I think that the kitchen opens that door for people to cracks open. Maybe it is something to do with that sensory experience because it cracks open memory for me, at least. So it creates this opportunity for beautiful storytelling, not just necessarily with the recipes, but, you know, as you say, like with culture and then with history and with lineage and all of the other things. So it's just so special.
My daughter's first preschool teacher, I think, often used to say to us, she was sort of ran the school, and she used to say, try to have your kids see you get together with friends in a way that is not just sitting and eating or sitting and having tea. Like, try to have them see you doing an activity together. So like a clothes mending circle. Yeah, I'm in a Waldorf school, so it's very, right. There's a lot of, you know, so we're like, you know, clothes mending or, you know, gardening or hiking or doing something so that because that kind of social connection that isn't just talking is what you understand. But I think it's so true of adults also.
Yeah. I just had a conversation. Well, it's actually going to air after this one with Megan Watterson. And we talk about different forms of nourishment. And there is the physical element of eating a meal. But then what is there beyond that? Like, how else do we nourish ourselves? And I can tell just in talking to you for 5 minutes here, one way you and I nourish ourselves, I should say, is through hearing story and that connection to people and culture. I find it fascinating. And I really feel like it feeds me in a way that a bowl of soup tastes good. But if I get a bowl of soup with a story, that feeds me in a whole deeper way.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So I want to talk to you today about weeknight cooking, but let me start here because your new book, Snacking Dinners, which is just fabulous. This book is written, it's very rare to find a book where you have recipes written for one person, meals that are intentionally designed for one person. And I think let's just start there. I have a lead up question to this, but because I think this is an important thing. Often, you know, the snacking dinners, like the girl dinner we see where it's like a bunch of snacks on a plate. All of this is beautiful and great. And I think there's something magical that happens when we do that with intention. We're not just maybe, my friend Amanda is going to call me out on this, maybe not just at the fridge with the door open, just eating stuff because she loves to do that. And I don't want to diminish her joy. But when we put the intention behind a meal for just ourselves, because so often we're cooking for other people or a meal for ourselves is a means to an end. I just want to hear from you what propelled you to write this book? And for you, you know, what does that mean for you to cook yourself a meal with intention? And maybe what would end up on your plate in the ideal world?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is something that I think is really at the heart of this book. And, this book is for anyone who wants it. The recipes are great for everybody. But when I started writing this book, it was because we had reached a stage in parenting where my daughter's evening activities started to be over like the traditional dinner hour.
Yeah.
And because we just had the one, we split up the time. And so there was an evening every week where my husband would take her and they'd get burritos on the way or something. And she would have an activity. And suddenly I had a night to myself. And sometimes that's seeing friends and sometimes that's getting exercise. But sometimes I just had a night to feed myself and take some time off. And so I started eating things that one or the other of them wouldn't necessarily want to eat with me. And it was just about like, oh, right, I can pick for me and not worry about what everybody else wants. And, it's not like I wanted to cook elaborate meals for myself in those moments. I wanted to have that downtime. But I did want to grab the foods that I wanted. So the very first one, it's actually on the cover right here. It was burrata with fresh fruit and a pesto drizzle because we had pesto in the fridge at the time. And then I added some honey and some salt. And so I bought the burrata. I think I bought all of it, the burrata, the baguette, and the fresh fruit just on the way home. And just set it up for myself. I did the pesto a little with a little bit of acid and a little bit of extra oil so that it drizzles. But it was just those flavors that I wanted.
Yeah.
At the time, my kid was not into the texture of burrata, so we never had it. And I was really missing it. And my husband loves this meal, but he loves it more as a snack and less as a dinner. But for me, it was perfect. And so that was the idea that launched this book. And then, of course, when Girl Dinner started, I thought, oh, just do a little more. Just like yourself. I want us to treat ourselves as well as we treat other people. There's that, put your oxygen mask on thing or the fill the well. But we talk about it, but we don't always do it. And so I wanted a really fast and easy way for people to feel like they're doing something for themselves.
And like you said, there really wasn't any cooking involved aside from chopping things. So it doesn't have to require dishes. It doesn't have to require pots and pans, just a little bit of intention. And then here you have is this meal that probably felt really nourishing. Again, go back to that same word. It's like, I'm sure that felt more nourishing to you because you were like, ooh, I want a little bit more acid. Ooh, okay, I'm going to set this thing up. Look at what I just created for myself. That feels good, like on a cellular level, more than just physical level. So I love the genesis of this book so much. But as I was reading it, it occurred to me that while these meals are so beautiful for one, they're so practical for a family as well. Right now, I have a high schooler, I have a new middle schooler, and it's like our nights in the fall are bonkers all of a sudden. Really, for the first time in our lives, we have a lot happening on weeknights. And this idea of a grazing type of dinner is fun and it's so accessible. So I was just hoping you could speak to that a little bit more about how we can use the same concept to make weeknight meals a little bit easier.
So actually, the original snacking dinner idea came out of when my daughter was a toddler, and I would just put like sardines on crackers for her.
Yeah.
And I thought, why am I not just eating like this? And, the adult version is to put a little, chili on it or to put, bulk up the flavor a little bit. And then I was making her crudité. Why don't we just eat carrots?
Yeah.
So I, for a number of years, have sort of thought about my week and thought, like, is there a night when I am going to need something on the table fast that, is not going to require a lot of cooking? Sometimes you can plan it. Sometimes it's really unpredictable. I think snacking dinners are really good for also the nights where that thing that you had planned for dinner accidentally got eaten by someone else anymore. Or, you open a packet of something and it turns out that there's mold on it. And, how did the bread go bad so quickly? So I try to have something in mind for the nights when I just run out of time or there's extra homework or there was traffic or whatever the case is. And so I think snacking dinners is like a once a week thing. It has really helped me make sure, because I prefer to be the one cooking. We get takeout maybe once a week, but that takes just as much time. It's very expensive. We can't control the flavors. We can't control what goes into it. So I try not to do that on school nights as much as possible, just because it doesn't keep all of us as happy. So this is sort of the alternative to that, is to have stuff. There's a whole chapter on pantry snacks. We just keep some stuff in the pantry so that I know I can throw stuff together. And then,
let's talk about that. What are the things that you keep in the pantry? What are some of your staples that lend themselves really easily to meals as opposed to just like, an after school snack?
Yeah. Yeah. I recently heard the term ingredient only household. And I thought, well, I guess we've kind of been doing that for a very long time.
I've never heard that. What is that? Ingredient only
just
household?
Not to have pre-made things in the house.
Gotcha.
We don't do a lot of frozen dinners. We do have frozen dumplings in the freezer at almost all times, and some flatbreads and stuff. But I mostly have things to cook things rather than, prepackaged sauces and pre-made things that can be heated. So for snacking dinners specifically, there's always cheese in the house. I have a kid. There's always good cheese. There's always Parmesan. There's always cheddar, and then generally some other things. There's always bread. There's always crackers, dried fruit, nuts, and then canned beans. And as many people have heard, if they've heard any other interviews, I belong to a bean club that sends me lots of beautiful heirloom dried beans all the time. And I love it. But I still keep canned beans in the house because, just like eggs, canned beans are a really fast path to a meal. And so there are a lot of recipes in this book that are, what can you do with canned beans or chickpeas that turn it into something else, because the protein is there. You don't really need to do anything other than just add some seasoning. So there's a version of like beans on toast, but a version I really like that has sort of an Italian sort of flavor to it. I do a black bean picadillo, so all the flavors you'd get in a Cuban picadillo, but just with black beans rather than meat, so that you can have all the ingredients around. And we do that with chips a lot of the time because that's more fun. Snacking dinners are supposed to be. Then there's like a hummus with like spiced nuts and stuff that I put on top. So those, and then of eggs, we always have eggs. Those are the things that I always have around. And then, of course, there's always some pasta, some canned tomatoes, those sort of basic prep things for the nights when I have more time, but still don't want to go to the store.
If you got home, I feel like I'm playing game show host a little bit, but say that you had those ingredients that you just named on hand, and we can maybe each share this. If you got home, say you have 20 minutes to get something on the table for your daughter, and maybe people are eating at different times, what would be your go-to?
20 minutes is a little tricky because some of the things I do are rice. And rice is more like a 30-minute just because.
I'll give you the rice. Because sometimes for me, I wrote a book called Buildable, and I always have grains in the freezer. This is just a little tip for everybody. If you're making a batch of grains, make double the amount and freeze half. I just always do. I've got quinoa in the freezer right now. I just do because of this kind of situation. So
that's great. We often use our rice cookers because I can just set it even in the morning and then it's just warm all day. And it's, that just makes things really easy. I also have a classic Japanese rice donabe for a project that I'm working on, and it makes perfect rice. It's so little effort. I'm shocked. So if I'm going to just cook it from scratch, I do that because that's, once it starts boiling, you just turn it off and you let it sit, and then you can do all your other stuff. But one of the recipes that we really go for on a quick night like that is a recipe that I did a version of in the book, and I call it Make Your Own Spicy Tuna Hand Rolls.
Yeah.
And instead of raw tuna, I just do canned tuna and sriracha and some other seasonings. And then before my daughter was sort of tiptoeing her way into spice, I would just make a batch for her that didn't have the sriracha and just had other seasonings. Put it all on the table. There's some cucumber. I add a little salt to sort of draw the moisture out and make them flexible with some nori. We always have nori. It's nice if you have the stuff that you buy specifically for hand rolls or stuff, but otherwise that snacking pack of nori is not a solution. Yeah. And, we often have frozen edamame or something in the fridge that I can add as a vegetable, or just, carrot sticks. We always have carrots. We always have celery. throw some of that stuff on the table also. But that way everybody can like make their own little bite.
Yeah.
You can put out some furikake for the people who want something a little more, flavorful, or they can add more of their own hot sauce or stuff. But everybody can have sort of the balance of things they want. It holds really well. So if people are coming in and out, they can have it when they need it. But that's a real go-to at our house.
It's so funny that you say that, because that is one of my family's favorite meals. I actually have a spicy salmon sushi roll on my blog, From Scratch Fast. But I love this idea that you do canned tuna, that you use canned tuna, because not everybody I think my recipe involves fresh salmon that you bake, and not everybody has that, or even canned salmon. But this idea of a meal that becomes interactive, and this was really the premise behind my book, Build a Bowl, which I wrote when my little one, we found ourselves eating down to the palate of my then 5-year-old. And we were like, wait a minute, where did all my beautiful meals go? Because you can put all of the components out and let people build their own. It becomes dynamic. It becomes fun. So we do sushi night like this. Oh my gosh, at least twice a month, if not more. And it varies every time according to like what fish, or if we have fish, but there's always avocado, the cucumber, those staples, the rice, the nori, or the seaweed snacks for the kids. Sometimes my husband and I choose to do a rice bowl and they'll make their little seaweed. Sometimes we're all making little hand rolls, but it's so dynamic and so fun. And I found that with my kids, it's helped them become so much more adventurous, because they're the ones in charge making this thing. And it's just any time where it's all hands on deck, it feels fun. Like lettuce rolls or lettuce wraps, all of those too. It's just like, it's not such a thing. Anytime I guess we're eating with our hands and we're engaged in that way, it kind of throws some of the rigidness of mealtime out the door. And then, put on some music. And so I just love this idea. And just like you said, with the canned tuna, that it's just such an easy thing to have on hand all the time. And we always have nori and seaweed snacks on hand as well. They're just family favorites. For us, I'd say along the same lines, just any kind of bowl situation. Mm-hmm. And often this is like our clean out the fridge night. And I find I can rummage through the fridge, pull out a bunch of odds and ends, and then make a really quick and easy sauce, and some sort of no-cook sauce, whether that's yogurt-based or a mayonnaise-based kind of aioli situation, or even a pesto or an herb-based sauce. But then we've got all these components. If you have a rice or something to hold it together, and then you can create this meal that's really quick and easy, but still dynamic and feel special. It doesn't just feel like unpackaging something, which doesn't have the same sparkle.
Yeah. Yeah. No, we do actually very similar. I used to call them taco bowls to get my kid to start eating them. Mm-hmm. And so that name kind of stuck. She usually just does the rice and the beans and tomato and avocado and black olives. I will roast or sear a bunch of vegetables and stuff and throw those on and pull out, like, my husband calls it the shelf of chili crisp, like
yes,
all our hot sauces, and get out the kimchi, which has gotten her to start nibbling on the kimchi. Also,
great,
which is really nice, and just pile all that in. And it's also, because we have this bean situation, I cook a big thing of beans, and we intentionally use it for these meals, and then spread it out throughout the rest of the week. But we have a lot of leftover rice sometimes, and it's really easy to just reheat the rice in a pan with some seasoning and maybe some tomato paste and make sort of a fake Spanish rice situation. And it makes the whole thing just feel a little like you've taken some time to do it, when realistically that was like a 3-minute process.
Yeah, right. I never, that's something that hadn't occurred to me, to take the leftover rice and to doctor up the grains in a way so it's not just rice in a bowl, but it's flavored rice, right? That feels instantly more special.
A little bit of oil, a little bit of tomato paste, and then garlic powder, a little bit of cumin, a little bit of coriander. Those things tend to give it that flavor that you would get from like cooking it for a long time with chicken spices.
We've touched on this, but are there any other tips that you have to get your daughter? How old is your daughter now?
She's 11. She's
She's
going to
11.
middle school this week.
Yes, I have a 10-year-old also going into middle school. Crazy. But what are some other tips you use now or maybe when she was younger to help her to grow her palate or become more adventuresome or even just to get dinner on the table? It can be hard with little ones.
Yeah, well, I had what my friends and I joke is food writer's curse, where your kid figures out what's important to you and then makes it really hard. So
that is so funny.
I know I'm not the only food writer with this experience.
No, you're not.
But I realized that if I made something that I really loved for me, again, this sort of goes back to the idea of the book, actually. If I made something I really loved for me and I made her something for her, but we ate them together, she wanted to know what I was eating. So we have a lot of things that got called mama something. Mama pasta, mama salad, because she always wanted it. And a lot of those foods became her favorite after.
Oh, guys, this is brilliant.
And I didn't want to share it. It was my meal, right? Like, I had made enough for me. And then I'm like, okay, fine. I have cooked for you and I am giving you some of my food, but not that bite. I'm not going to give you the best bite. Try to. Because she wouldn't, a 4-year-old does not appreciate the best bite. But it really helped. And then as she's gotten older, she's become a good cook. She doesn't cook as often as I think she would like just because life is very busy.
Yeah.
But anytime that she can come and help assemble her own plate, or I can ask her to help stir something, or she was short for a while and she is not now, which is great because I can have her chopping things and really helping. She does a lot of baking, which I think a lot of kids start out with.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think now that she's older, she also likes to get up earlier in the morning so that she can help put her lunch together and have a little more control over it. I think the control thing is very helpful.
I think the control thing has been the number one tip in my household is to give them the control because like you, coming as, a food stylist at that time when my kids were little and a food writer and doing all the things, I took so much pride in plating these beautiful plates of food and cooking this food, and then they wouldn't want it. And it was like, I had to really get out of my ego, and it wasn't easy, you guys. It was not easy, but I realized that I was cooking for me. I was not cooking for them. And once I stopped, and I just said, okay, I literally for a long time just left food in pans and just like, come and serve yourself. And then all of a sudden I started to see this massive shift. And now we almost serve everything family style. On the weeknights, we still will just keep things in pans. I'm saying this so people aren't like, you're like plating, no. On the weekends, we'll do that. But just keep things in pans, let people serve themselves. And it is remarkable. I was just actually sharing this story yesterday with a woman who works with me about my daughter when she was 5, my youngest, who's now 10, and I had made these Brussels sprouts. It's actually a recipe that's going to be in my new book, and they have this brown butter maple sauce, and they're so outrageously delicious, but never in my life would I thought that she would like them. She was an ardent Brussels sprout skeptic, if not like hater. And so I just had them on the table in a bowl, and she came and I went back to the stove to pull out more things. And by the time I got back to the table, she had literally eaten half the bowl, like half a pound of Brussels sprouts. And it was one of those moments where as I wanted to start screaming and be like, oh my gosh, Judy, look what you did. You're eating Brussels sprouts. And I took every ounce of stoicism for me to just not say anything, just pretend like, oh, hey, yeah, you eating those? Totally play it cool and be like, and then I go back to the kitchen. I'm like, oh my gosh, James, she's eating all the Brussels sprouts. But I realized it had to be on her terms. And of course she liked these because it was like a bridge flavors of having that little bit of sweetness and the richness from the brown butter. But also the minute I tried to make it something, then it's exactly what you were saying with her wanting to eat your food. She wanted to eat it because it was special for you. But in this experience, it was like no one was telling her to eat this stuff. She just found it and she enjoyed it. And that gave her this sense of control. And then it was a real light bulb moment to be like, okay, these kids can choose. And we still have a rule that they have to try everything. I'm telling them all the time, I'm like, usually it takes about 8 tries just for your palate to understand what's happening. And we always framed it this way when the kids were little. We would be like, we want to be able to travel with you guys to awesome restaurants. And we want to be able to travel to different cities and try new things. So it's so important to expand your palate. It's just a fun thing to do. So we kind of always had that as one day you'll like it. it's okay if it's not today. Just try it. If you don't like it, it's okay. But I bet you one day you will. And so it's like getting them excited for the potential, but not shaming them for the moment of where their palate is at.
Yeah, we do have a very similar rule, but mostly it's because in the moment she'll like it. But I think it is a control thing, and she isn't only, and she gets, feelings about she feels like often, or when she was littler especially, we felt there were 2 adults and 1 child in the house. She felt there were 3 people, one of whom was very poorly treated. And so it was really a control issue for her, where she would come to the table and be like, yuck, I'm not eating any of it. And we would sit there until she took a bite, another bite. And eventually, an hour later, she's like, this is the best thing ever. Can we have it all the time? And then the next night we would repeat that process again.
Yeah. You have such patience.
Well, it's not always, but it's out there all the time. And, as she's getting older, she understands that pattern, and that doesn't happen nearly as often.
Yeah.
But it was really just an issue of like overcoming hesitancy. And, tweens also have that like natural ick situation going on, as they that's very developmentally appropriate, but also so hard to feed for. Yeah. So we're just also negotiating that now.
Yeah, it does. That happened big time with my oldest. And we were like, wait, what is this regression of palate happening? My husband and I have these conversations, because I just want to say this, because we didn't know that was a normal thing, and we kind of allowed it to happen, but we were like, and it is a phase, and she's through it. And what's great now, since I do have 2 and the youngest looks up to the oldest so much, my little one is just naturally more adventurous, because we're all just sitting there eating it. So of course, this is like so kid dependent, and it does take a massive amount of patience, I think, to get through those cycles, and to also remind ourselves that mostly these are just phases. And I look back now and I'm like, that was tough. That was tough, but you do it. And then the phase, things shift to something else. So I always remind myself that everything comes in cycles.
Yeah. Well, and it's been interesting recently, just because, the tweens, it's the same thing that makes them want to, they want to brush their teeth. They want to brush their hair. They want to, it's that realizing they have ownership over themselves and all that social stuff and the rest of it. I think that the ick is an important, haven't looked into it, but like there's a biological function to it in the same way. I am
sure.
To the 2-year-old, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they're now starting to realize that they are individuating from us, and friend groups become more important, and that sense of safety within fitting within a group. And so, it's like a bunch of experimentation that they're going through, which is important and sometimes trying, but it's also, if we can have that perspective, and I find it really helpful to share this information with my little one. Like, I will tell her about her brain science and explain what's happening, and just in a really neutral way. Again, not when we're sitting down staring at each other talking, but like just in the car to be like, so you might find that this is happening and this is normal. And just because I think that gives them perspective on their own patterns a little bit more. Yeah. And sometimes I wish I had that for myself. So, well, I just want to finish up just on the topic of lunches really quick. You mentioned that your daughter now likes to help prepare them, which is a great tip. My 2 daughters have to bring a lunch every single day because they can't eat gluten, and there are not gluten-free options at their school. So we're always looking for new ideas. And I want to say, literally, if a kid is happy eating the same thing for lunch every day, like, go for it. That's a great thing too. But my kids aren't. They want some diversity, and it's hard. It's hard to come up with new ideas. So what are some of your school lunch ideas?
Yeah, no, we're in the same boat. There isn't a school lunch option. There will be this year, but I'm not going to take advantage of it just because it will be expensive mostly. And she definitely doesn't like to eat things too many times in a week. My trick is I think this must have just been what my mom did. Not always, I shouldn't say that. Most dinners are planned in a way that creates a lunch the next day. So if it's pasta, there's always an extra serving. If it's chicken, I know she won't cut up the chicken herself in her lunch, but I can throw it into, she really likes salad because I like salad and she's that age. I can make a really chicken hearty sort of salad with some vegetables, or shred it up and put it in some rice. The bean and rice bowls that we do also the next day. And I cook that way for myself too. I joke that I plan my meals based on what I want to put in my salads later in the week. That's what I do for my lunch. So if I'm roasting like chicken or salmon or something, it's in part because I want it later for lunches.
Yeah.
So her meals get planned that same way. And then, there are just some go-to like, sandwiches and stuff that we just do every couple of weeks. She got really into baguette at one point, and I was like, great, if you will eat more of your tuna salad because it's on a baguette, let's go for it. Like that was such a little adjustment to make for us to like, get one and wrap it up in, plastic or beeswax or something so that it doesn't go bad. And just those tiny little tweaks that make her feel like she's got some ownership over the lunch because it's more special. I also have been making onigiri. A friend of hers used to come with onigiri, or she still does all the time. And so I asked her mom to show me.
Oh, fun.
Point, but they weren't holding together very well.
Yeah.
So we do that for snacks and stuff.
Oh, that's so fun.
For a project I'm working on for the future, there's a scone recipe that I was testing, and you can freeze them. So we freeze the batter, or actually the formed scones, and then throw them in the oven from frozen in the morning. And that gives her like something that isn't actually very sweet, but feels a little like a treat as her morning snack. Because that really is the issue for us, particularly if she's in afternoon care, which she won't be this year. But it was how do we cram enough food in the backpack
to get you through the whole day? I know. It's real. We have a very similar strategy. We're always trying to make leftovers if we can, although they're at the age where it's very rare for us to have leftovers all of a sudden, and which is a really good thing. But for my little one, she's always loved what we call picnic lunches. And essentially they're snack lunches. And it's a bento box, and each little container is filled with something different. And she loves helping make those. And in fact, she'll get like super artsy and craftsy about it sometimes, which is really cute. My oldest loves a warm lunch, a pasta, or she'll even make in the morning a grilled cheese or like a panini type of thing and then wrap it in foil, or a quesadilla and wrap it in foil and bring it to school. By the time she eats it, it's got to be, room temperature. But yeah, we do a lot of rice and beans. But I just feel like we're kind of always trying to find the new thing, and it's a challenge.
I'm a little jealous of those families where the kid likes to eat the same thing every day. I'm just shocked.
Yes, I'm like, please. That would be so. My kids have never even eaten a peanut butter and jelly. They both hate peanut butter, and peanut butter is like I think it's just one of God's gifts to humankind. And so I'm like, not a peanut butter. My husband and I always laugh, like, think about if we could just slap together a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for their lunch. Wouldn't that be something?
No, I think once a week or so, that, or like, it's one of the reasons we have goat cheese around, a goat cheese sandwich with either some shredded vegetables or even just like black olives, because that feels special. Like, it's actually quite a bit of protein. If I want to make it fancy, I'll put some lemon zest in there because it's California. We have lemons. But like, it's just, something, the protein and the bread. It really is.
It's just seems like it's such a brilliant idea. And my kids are not into it, but that's okay. That's okay. I'm into it. So I'll one day. Well, Georgia, thank you so much. I feel like everyone needs to get their hands on this book, first of all, just because it's such a beautiful way of framing how we feed ourselves, but then certainly offers us just a plethora of ideas for how to feed families as well, particularly during busy times, which for many of us who are, have kids, September is a very busy time.
Absolutely.
I do have one last question for you. This is just a fun one. And that is, if it were your last meal on earth in this moment right now, what would it be?
Oh, right now. Oh, it's so tricky. I mean, sushi is always a good one. We've been traveling and eating great food, but I feel like it's all been a little bit on the heavier side. And sushi often feels light, but also filling. But also, I mean, I lived in southwestern China, and there's this one particular bowl of noodles. I can't even make it because the ingredients are just not makeable here. But if I could go there and have a bowl of noodles, it's spicy and savory and a tiny bit sweet. And these noodles are sort of bouncy. They're made out of rice cakes and spiced. It's very specific to this one part of China, but we dream about it a lot.
Sounds amazing. Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. This is so fun.
Thank you so much for listening. If this work resonates with you in any way, you can support it by leaving a review or comment or sharing it with friends. Also, you can sign up for the newsletter, Mind, Body, Spirit, Food. And by becoming a paid member for just $5 a month, you help fund this entire project. Thank you so much to all of you who are already subscribed, especially to those paid subscribers. This work could not happen without you. I'm Nikki Sizemore, and as always, remember to nourish yourself with intention and love.